Ethan Walker stepped onto the glossy showroom floor, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his faded jacket. The smell of leather and polished metal filled the air, but the moment he walked in, all eyes were on him, for the wrong reasons. The salespeople barely masked their disdain as they exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. To them, he was just another nobody who had wandered into a place where he didn't belong. He had expected this reaction. In fact, he was counting on it. Ethan wasn't just any customer. He was the CEO of one of the largest investment firms in the country. But today, he wasn't here as a businessman. He was here to see how people treated others when they thought they had nothing to offer. A young salesman with slicked back hair and a fake smile approached. "Sir, are you lost? The used car lot is across the street." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching. "Actually, I'm looking for something new." He glanced around the showroom, where rows of gleaming luxury vehicles stood under bright spotlights. "Something top of the line." The salesman let out a chuckle, stepping in front of him. "Sir, these cars cost more than your rent. Why don't you take a look at something more affordable?" A few employees laughed from behind their desks. Ethan felt the familiar sting of judgment, but this time, he wasn't the one being tested. They were. And they had no idea who they were humiliating. Ethan stood still, watching the salesman's smirk widen. He had encountered arrogance before, but rarely this blatant. The man in front of him wasn't just dismissive. He was enjoying this. "Listen," the salesman sighed, crossing his arms. "These cars? They start at 6 figures. I doubt you could even afford a test drive." From across the showroom, another salesman, taller and with an expensive watch glinting on his wrist, called out, "Hey, Chad, what's going on?" Chad, the man now blocking Ethan's path, grinned. "Oh, just making sure we don't waste time with people who clearly aren't serious buyers." The taller salesman, Jason, strolled over, eyeing Ethan from head to toe. "Oh wow, is this guy really trying to buy a car here?" He let out a short laugh. "Let me guess, minimum down payment, longest possible loan?" More laughter. Ethan clenched his jaw, but forced himself to stay calm. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to see how far they'd go. He turned to face Jason. "Actually, I was looking at the Aston Martin over there." Jason's laughter stopped. For a second, something flickered across his face. Surprise? Doubt? But then, just as quickly, the arrogance returned. "Sir," Jason scoffed, patting Ethan's shoulder like he was a child, "that car is worth more than most houses. Maybe try something less ridiculous?" Ethan exhaled slowly. They weren't just rude, they were cruel, and they were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. Ethan took a slow breath, keeping his expression unreadable. He had dealt with men like this before, people who measured worth in bank accounts and designer suits. But today, they were about to learn how wrong they were. He motioned toward the Aston Martin again. "I'd still like to see the car." Jason and Chad exchanged an exaggerated glance, shaking their heads. "Look, buddy," Jason said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I don't think you understand how things work here." Chad grinned, stepping closer. "We don't let just anyone sit in our premium cars. We have standards." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Standards?" Chad gestured to Ethan's worn-out jacket and scuffed sneakers. "Yeah, we deal with serious buyers. Not people who just want to take pictures for social media and pretend they belong here." Ethan let the insult hang in the air, his fingers tightening around the fabric of his jacket. They didn't just think he was poor, they thought he was beneath them. A customer across the showroom had started watching, shifting uncomfortably. Even some of the other employees looked uneasy. But Jason and Chad? They were too busy enjoying themselves to care. Jason smirked. Tell you what, if you can prove you're not wasting our time, maybe, I'll let you take a closer look. Ethan tilted his head. How do you want me to prove it? Jason chuckled, then glanced at Chad, as if daring him to say it. Chad grinned. Show us your bank account. The laughter that followed was deafening. Ethan had heard enough. The room exploded in laughter. A few salespeople near the desks chuckled, shaking their heads. It was humiliating, but not for Ethan. It was for them. Ethan let the noise settle before speaking. You want to see my bank account? His voice was calm, almost amused. Chad smirked, arms crossed. Yeah, unless you're scared to prove us wrong. Jason nodded in mock agreement. Come on, man. If you're actually rich, show us. Or are you just another wannabe trying to impress people? Ethan sighed, pulling out his phone, not to show them his account, but because he had just decided how this day would end. He tapped the screen, then looked back up. You know, he said, slipping the phone back into his pocket, I could have just walked out of here. But now, I think I'll stay a little longer. Chad frowned, his smirk faltering slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Ethan glanced toward the sales office in the back. Is your manager in today? Jason scoffed. Why? You gonna complain? Hate to break it to you, but our boss doesn't have time for people who can't afford. Actually, a deep voice interrupted. I do. The room went dead silent. The manager, a tall man in a crisp charcoal suit, stood in the doorway of his office, arms crossed. His gaze swept over the scene, then landed on Ethan. And in that instant, everything changed. Jason and Chad froze. The smirks, the arrogance. All of it vanished the moment they saw their manager standing there. Their confident posture stiffened as the reality of the situation sank in. Ethan, on the other hand, remained calm. He had seen this moment coming. The manager stepped forward, his polished shoes echoing against the glossy showroom floor. His eyes weren't on Ethan. They were on his employees. What exactly is going on here? His tone was low, but firm, the kind of voice that demanded answers. Chad cleared his throat, forcing a weak smile. Oh, nothing, sir. Just, trying to help a potential customer. Jason nodded quickly. Yeah, just explaining some details about our vehicles. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Is that what you were doing? The manager's gaze finally met Ethan's, and recognition flickered in his eyes. His expression shifted from neutral to tense. Mr. Walker, he said slowly, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. I didn't expect to see you here today. Chad and Jason stiffened. Their eyes darted between Ethan and their boss. Confusion turned into panic. Ethan let the moment stretch before answering. Well, I was hoping to buy a car, but it seems your team had other plans. The manager's face darkened. He knew exactly what had just happened. Jason swallowed hard. Sir, you know him? The manager's jaw tightened. You idiot, he muttered. For the first time all day, Jason and Chad looked terrified. Jason and Chad stood frozen, their confidence shattered. The reality of the situation hit them like a freight train. The man they had humiliated wasn't just another customer. He was someone powerful, someone they should have never underestimated. Ethan exhaled, turning to the manager. I assume you'll want to handle this? The manager gave a sharp nod before shifting his glare to the two salesmen. Follow me. Now. Chad hesitated. Sir, we. Now. The manager's voice cut through the air like a blade. The entire showroom was silent, every employee and customer watching. Jason's face had gone pale. He had spent the entire afternoon mocking Ethan, treating him like dirt, and now he realized his mistake could cost him everything. As the manager led them toward his office, Chad stole one last glance at Ethan, his expression no longer smug. It was fear. Genuine, paralyzing fear. Ethan didn't move. He had nothing left to say to them. Their fate was sealed. A moment later, the office door slammed shut. The tension in the room slowly faded, replaced by a murmur of whispers from the other employees. Some looked horrified. Others? They looked relieved. One of the younger salesmen approached cautiously. "Sir, would you still like to see the Aston Martin?" Ethan smiled. Finally, someone who knew how to do their job. Ethan followed the young salesman across the showroom floor, his steps slow and deliberate. The atmosphere had shifted. Employees who once ignored him now watched in silence, their gazes filled with unease. The young salesman, Mark, led him to the Aston Martin. "This is the DB11, sir," he said, his voice professional but slightly nervous. Hand-stitched leather interior, V12 engine, and a top speed of 200 miles per hour. Ethan ran his fingers along the sleek black exterior. It was flawless, just like the illusion of exclusivity this dealership had tried to maintain. Mark hesitated. "Would you like to sit inside?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, but first," he turned back to the employees still watching from a distance. "I want to ask you all a question." The showroom fell silent. Even the receptionist looked up from her desk. Ethan exhaled slowly. "How many of you judged me before knowing who I was?" No one spoke. Some looked at the floor. Others shifted uncomfortably. He nodded, as if expecting the silence. "That's the problem," he continued. "It's not about money. It's about respect. And today, I saw exactly how little of it you give to people who don't look like they belong here." Mark swallowed hard. "Sir, I hope I didn't." Ethan cut him off with a small smile. "You didn't. And that's why you'll be the one making this sale." Mark's eyes widened. From across the room, the other employees looked horrified. They had lost more than a customer today. They had lost an opportunity they would never get back. A heavy silence hung over the showroom. The employees who had laughed at Ethan now stood still, their faces unreadable. Mark, on the other hand, looked stunned. He had just been handed the biggest sale of his career. Jason and Chad were nowhere to be seen. The manager had made sure of that. Ethan turned back to Mark. "Let's talk numbers." Mark quickly recovered, pulling out his tablet. "Of course, sir. Would you like to discuss financing options or—" Ethan shook his head. "I'll pay in full." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Several employees exchanged wide-eyed glances. The receptionist's pin slipped from her hand. A customer near the waiting area muttered, "Did he just say full price?" Mark swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, sir. I'll prepare the paperwork immediately." As he rushed off, Ethan turned back to the other employees. "It's funny, isn't it?" His voice was calm, but his words were sharp. "An hour ago, none of you thought I belonged here. And now, you're all in shock because I can afford what you assumed I couldn't." No one spoke, because there was nothing they could say. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. "Maybe next time, you'll remember that appearances don't determine worth." The message was clear, and it was one they wouldn't forget. Mark returned moments later, the purchase documents in his hands. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from excitement. This wasn't just a sale. It was a turning point. Ethan signed without hesitation, sliding his black credit card across the table. No questions. No negotiations. just proof that everything the others had assumed about him was wrong. The receipt printed, and Mark handed him the keys. "Thank you, Mr. Walker. It's an honor to assist you." Ethan nodded. "You treated me with respect. That's all it takes." He turned, walking past the remaining employees, their faces still pale with regret. They had mocked him, humiliated him, laughed at him, and now they had to stand there and watch as the very man they insulted drove away in a car worth more than their annual salaries combined. The dealership manager approached, his posture rigid. "Mr. Walker, on behalf of—" Ethan raised a hand, cutting him off. "No apologies. Just do better." The manager swallowed hard. He knew this was more than a lost sale. This was a reputation permanently stained. Ethan stepped outside, the cool air filling his lungs. The showroom lights gleamed against the hood of his brand-new Aston Martin. He slid into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel. As he started the engine, he glanced back at the glass windows of the dealership. Jason and Chad stood inside, watching, faces full of shame. Ethan smirked, then drove away. They had judged him for looking poor. Now, they would remember him as the richest man they had ever ignored.